Well, man, I love to start the story kind of with origin. And I know in your pre-interview, we took you to some places that you hadn't thought about in a while. But, I know you were born, raised for a certain amount of years in Seoul, Korea, right? And you lived there until you were 7. What do you remember about growing up there?
I don't remember a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's just that whole experience of immigrating and moving to a new country, because it's just little flashes.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of it's tied to like photos that we still have of my childhood and like stories that have been told. But and it's really helpful that my brother has a better memory of it because he's got a lot more of the stories. But honestly can tell you there's like so much of it I
Just
don't
felt
remember.
like a blur.
I just don't remember.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy because you were there for 7 years.
No, I know, and I need to open it back up. I think I need to,
Yeah.
People have suggested mushrooms and
yeah.
Go down
that road.
Yeah, go down that road.
Let's learn some stuff.
Yeah.
And most of your family there? Had your family immigrated into the U.S. at that point? Do you remember any of that?
So my mom is the oldest of 7.
Okay.
And all her siblings were still there.
Yeah.
And then my dad's family is the family that moved here. Yeah. So it was my dad. He has an older sister, younger brother, another younger sister, and then it was my aunt who first moved, and their family, and she married
she got married, a GI.
Yeah. And then moved to Eugene.
They moved to Eugene.
Yeah, Eugene, Oregon.
Do you know like why they picked that? Was he stationed there or something?
That's his family's home.
Okay.
Yeah. So they came back, and he was a CPA and had a CPA. What do you call CPA? What do you
CPA practice?
Yeah, sure.
Firm.
Yeah, firm. Yeah. And so that's how we ended up in Springfield.
Huh. And so then your dad and mom kind of followed them out to Oregon.
So it was a long process, and over several years, they were able to move. And then what happened was, so my great Uncle John Gregor, and my great aunt were in Eugene. They had gotten some other family there, and then they had an apartment complex that they owned, and you just need a sort of a manager on site, and so that's the job that my dad got. And so the whole idea of like working from home and living where you work was actually kind of started all there, I suppose. Yeah, that was our life. So tiny family of 5 in this like tiny little 2-bedroom apartment in Springfield, Oregon.
Wow, Springfield.
Yeah, humble beginnings. Yeah.
The city behind The Simpsons.
Yeah, finally. Wasn't it just like 5 years ago that they like
I feel like
actually
no one
put
knew
it
that.
out there? I don't know why they kept it in their pocket.
It's a little, little Easter egg, a little, secret no one knew about.
Yeah.
So this was like, you moved there probably like 85, 84, 85, and you go and you get into school. What's that like?
Well, okay, so I don't remember this, but apparently my first day, the entire day, I had my head down on my desk and just...
Because you didn't want to go.
I didn't want to go, I guess, yeah. A classmate of mine who was in that class reminded me of that when we later met down the road in high school. He's like, I was in your first grade class. I remember your first day, and you basically had your head in your desk.
Huh.
But even that was obviously a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
And like, the story is that like my first school lunch that I had, it was like, I don't even remember what it was, but I didn't do well with it, and I puked, and they like...
You puked?
Yeah, I puked, and maybe it was like the second day or whatever, but I puked, and I had to get picked up. My parents had to come get me.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you sound like your whole body was rejecting this experience.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
How was it for your siblings?
I think they fared better.
Yeah.
I would imagine, okay, so Elliot is 7, Frankie's 5.
Yeah.
And just imagining Elliot going to a foreign country and like, he's just starting to, I think it's not that he's like figuring himself out, but it's at 7 o'clock, or 7 years old, you kind of think you know what's going on, and then everything gets gets
turned upside
down, it's got to be pretty traumatic.
I have to imagine. So I mean, I think about that now. Like if I just like tomorrow, my whole life was different from what we're doing now.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this. Right? You just don't know.
Yeah.
And so as that, I think about that. School's kind of weird. What's Springfield like? Like I gotta imagine. Yes, you have your family. Yes, your uncle owns an apartment complex, but is there a big Asian American community? Is there a Korean community there?
There was a small community of Koreans, and there was a small church that our family attended in Eugene, but like in Springfield, there really wasn't. My brother and I were probably the only Koreans, like from K through 12. Yeah, there was a small, like maybe like a Vietnamese community that was there. So there were a few Asians, but not a lot. It was, mostly white.
How did you deal with that in high school? Right, it's you and your brother, and like you're in a high school that's all white kids.
Yeah.
How do you start to like assimilate to like?
I mean, I also feel like I fell into a lot of like the middle child syndrome stuff. Like my brother would clearly excelled throughout his high school years. He was always really good at sports. He was on varsity basketball and tennis, and so I just, I spent most of my life just sort of following in his footsteps. I suppose I still did up to moving to New York. But yeah, just kind of following him around and like hanging out with his friends. I didn't really have a lot of friends of my own. Socially awkward, I'm sure.
We all are.
Still socially awkward.
We've been stuck inside for 2 years.
Yeah, in certain situations for sure. But yeah, so he was always good at sports, and so I kind of would, follow along and play, and like we would play tennis together, and he played a lot of basketball, and he's a basketball coach now, so that's sort of been his life. But yeah, I mean, I think it was a pretty like normal upbringing. I think back to my childhood. We live across a big park, and we would literally be gone until it's sundown. Like my parents didn't know anything that we were doing. But we were in the park. We were in the park for hours and hours until it got dark.
Yeah.
And then we would come home and eat, and then like maybe even leave again. But yeah, there were times like I just remember just leaving the house and being gone all day, and there's no way for them to know where the hell I was.
You don't have any GPS. There's no phone. There's no pager. They're just like, come home before the lights go down.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know that they could have even helped it. We were just gone.
Yeah. You just wanted to be out.
Yeah.
I get it. Speaking of your brother, right? So it sounds like your brother has had and continues to have a big, impact on your life. Yeah. And then he ended up moving to New York, right? He was doing Teach for America at one point. And you started to visit him quite frequently. And you were making plans to move to New York to be out there with him, or because you had a plan to do something?
I didn't have a plan. So I was at U of O. So after high school, U of O, it was going into my 5th year. I was just a bad student. I was a fine arts major, and there was like a small like animation department, computer graphics stuff. And I was barely doing that and barely like passing. And it was my summer before my 5th year. I went and visited Marshall while he was in New York, and he we did the thing, the broke tourist thing, and and just experienced New York in a way that it was eye-opening. It was definitely growing up in Springfield, not having traveled much.
There's a different aspect of culture.
I mean, it's
a lot of layers.
World. Yeah.
It's like you're like, this is America.
Yeah, that's how I felt. Wow. I was like, wow, this is where I want to be.
What do you remember like that distinctly stuck out to you on some of those visits? Like, had it been food at that point, or was it just more so things like different people and different music, how people dress? I don't know. What were some of those things that might have stuck out?
So he was living in Harlem at the time, and that was just amazing. Just to be there and just seeing a totally different world. Yeah. and then just we would go down to Chinatown and go to K-Town,
Yeah.
like a real K-Town. Like I didn't experience Korean
Never
food at all
experienced that.
growing up in Eugene and Springfield.
Really?
Just-
Not even from at home?
Well,
little bit.
my mom's cooking mostly,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So it was really my mom's cooking, and like there was like one Korean restaurant maybe that we would go to, and I didn't really come up to Portland much, and there really wasn't much of a Korean like restaurant scene here either. And so like rediscovering Korean food through K-Town in Manhattan and going to like Fort Lee, and we would, he like took us all around. I mean, man, that was mind blowing. It was mind blowing, and I needed to come back, and so I was also just kind of effing off of school and wasn't really in a hurry to graduate, and I had lots of friends, and we all lived in a house together, and so like I was just
you partying.
And then I came back, and I was like, okay, I gotta finish up and get out of here.
And New York was the only Now, that was also around the time that 9/11 happened. So 9/11 happens, and it doesn't change your plan at all?
No, 9/11 happens, and I still was very determined to go, and it was like the following February that I was able to finish school that fall, and
Wow. What'd your parents think?
Well, my brother was already there.
Yeah.
So he like paved the way, and they were like, okay, well,
He's there.
Also, like my senior year, throughout college, I was like working at this tennis shop, and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna keep working at this tennis shop and make money. Like I worked through all of college.
Yeah.
I really probably worked more than I should have been concentrating and finishing school. But yeah, they were happy for me to go and try and figure it out, and even through college and up until like the first couple of years in New York, I really didn't know about like cooking in restaurants, being a chef, restaurant scene, food scene.
That wasn't your life.
Any of that. I had no idea. I'd never been to a really nice restaurant ever. So yeah, and even those first years in New York, we never went to a nice place. Couldn't afford to.
Yeah.
Broke.
What was most of your meals? Were like street food or?
Yeah, street food. Marshall would, he would take us out to food and K-Town and stuff. But yeah, we would like go on a weekly like grocery trip to Chinatown and pick up groceries for the week and cook. We shared a flat floor with another roommate of ours who was actually friends from college, and he was more into it. He was also just more into food and cooking at home.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where it all started.
Huh.
Yeah.
It was just like being around them and like it sounds like that was just bonding for you all to spend time together.
Yeah.
And it kind of, you just started to kind of fall into it.
Yeah, and then just cooking for me and Marshall or the three of us, and he would cook, and I would always be like, what's going on? What are you doing?
Like,
what's for dinner? But really it was the house that we lived in that
Tell me about the house. And this is in Harlem.
This is in Harlem. So
Okay.
it was on 118th and Lenox. It was a 4-story brownstone, and on the ground floor there was like a couple. There was another couple on the basement floor, and then there was us, 3 of us on one floor, and then a 4th floor of 3 women.
Okay.
And it was like a church community that Marshall had been connected with, and that's how he got that flat. And every Sunday would be Sunday dinners.
Oh, yeah.
And so we would cook. Everybody would take turns cooking for everybody else. So I think when, cooking for myself or my brother, a couple people is pretty easy. Like there's not much to it. But then you cook for 12 people, and it becomes
everything
a whole
changes.
thing. It becomes a whole thing, and I would stay up late nights watching, Food Network and the Stand and Stir shows and like lots of Jamie Oliver TV shows and stuff like that. And like I got into it. I got into it a lot.
Did you think anything more of it other than just like, I'm enjoying doing this and I love this kind of community that I'm in?
Well, I think it was good for me to not know what the next step is. So I was just doing it, and then like our roommate David, he was like, oh, there's this like Whole Foods that just opened in Chelsea. Like it's like a really great like, and I think that was the first Whole Foods in New York.
Ever. Yeah.
And you know, they were all about organic produce and, you know, all this stuff. And so he was going there, and I was like, oh, cool. I'll just like get a job, like, you know, as a checkout.
That's how you pay the
whatever,
bills,
just
make some money. Yeah.
any old job.
Yeah.
And I got that job, and I got into food a little bit, seeing all the people working in produce, meat section, fish section. And then the coolest part of that job was there was a delivery service. So people would do their grocery shopping, and then they would buy like 2 cases of like water, or sparkling water or something. And they would not want to take it up to their own 4-floor walk up. And so you buy it and you chuck it on a shelf, and then you pay a delivery service through the restaurant to go deliver it. But what was cool about it wasn't just like the neighborhood. There was like a refrigerated van, and you could drive.
Oh, so you can get to go learn other areas, right, that you wouldn't go to otherwise.
Yeah, so I spent like those first couple of years in New York driving a 15-passenger van that was like a refrigerated van. We would fold out these maps. You know, we didn't have like a GPS thing.
Yeah, you were like literally using maps.
From 99th to Battery Park, we would drive all over town. It would be like me, another guy. He would have all the slips, all the groceries in there.
Yeah.
And then we'd just like drive around with like walkie-talkies between the 2 vans, smoking cigarettes. Like, I don't know, it was a wild time. There would be like tips, and so at the end of the night, we would like get all these tips and then go to the bar down the street. It was a hilarious time. It was also like in Chelsea, and so there was like a bunch of NYU kids that would like also do that job, and they were doing fun, creative stuff at school, and so we would go see them doing their thing, and yeah, it was a wild time. I did that for like 2 years. It was really hilarious and fun.
So at some point in this, right, you're really getting into all aspects of food, and you decide you're going to go apply to the French Culinary Institute.
Yeah.
Right? And so I believe you're like, the story is you're on your way to downtown Soho to enroll, and you stop by a friend's place in West Village.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a friend tells you something.
Well, she's like, okay, I'm explaining that it's, you know, 35 grand for a 9-month program.
35 grand for 9 months.
Yeah, I'm sure it's way more now. But yeah, I was still paying my loans off from going to U of O. And yeah, she was like, why don't you just go and try and get a job? Like, go and be a dishwasher or something. I don't know. But I have gotten this advice, and I would give this advice to other people who are trying to get into it, because I think it's just getting your foot in the door. But that seed had been planted, and I was wanting to do that, but kind of scared to do it. But it just happened to be that I was like on the way from, you know, having seen her, it was like early in the afternoon, to the subway station, and I like walked by the Spotted Pig, and there's like, you know, it's like all this beautiful greenery in the front, looks tiny. It was tiny, cute little like pig statue in the front, and yeah, I just like something drew me, and I went in, and I asked the host if I can talk to the chef about getting a job, or anybody really. I don't think I even knew that I needed to like ask for the chef. But I was like, oh, you know, I'm just looking for a job.
Bloomfield, right?
Yeah. But I was like, I think I'll just do whatever. Do you have anything?
What did you end up doing? Like, what was the job you ended up they had available?
Boy. So in like professional restaurants, there's like, well, it's like a French term. It's commis. It's basically like you're at the bottom of the rung. You're there to do whatever. It was a small kitchen, like 4 people in the restaurant. Her, April there, and yeah, so there was like a basement kitchen too. Most New York restaurants have basement kitchens, and so my job was to just like run around, like get stuff, mise en place, backups from downstairs. Their signature dish was like this burger with Roquefort cheese, but also shoestring fries, and so like buckets, 22-quart buckets, full of water and shoestring fries that have been mandolin into there, and I would like have to walk through the kitchen and out the restaurant and then down the basement and then like carry these big heavy buckets of water and shoestring fries. That was my job for the first like 3 months, running around, putting plates away and helping the dishwasher.
And were you content with it for that? I mean, it was new.
I had no idea.
You had no idea what else was
to
going
expect.
on. Yeah.
I was just in a restaurant and working and not paying money for culinary school. And so I was super happy. I don't think anybody even knew I don't think they even knew my last name for a long time. I didn't get my first check for like 6 weeks or something. Like I didn't get put in payroll properly. There was like all kinds of weird stuff, but I was like, I don't know. I guess this is how it is. Like they must know what they're doing. I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just gonna go along with this.
Yeah. How long did you go along with it?
I mean, I worked for April for 10 years, so I went along with it for a while.
What was that experience, right? So you're there for 10 years. So you're 10 years, a New York restaurant.
Yeah.
This is as quintessential as a restaurant experience is probably going to get.
Yeah.
What was that like? You literally went from the bottom of the bottom, and you learned so much that I'm sure you use today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just tried to absorb it all. It helped that I didn't know what to expect. And I think, that just pushed me to limits that I didn't know were there. And thinking back on my experience, April was really good about doing that too, which is like basically pushing everybody to all of their limits. Really like just holding everybody off the edge of a cliff, but with like little thread barely keeping him on,
Yeah.
And that's just a level that, restaurants like that, especially busy, especially lots of like, attention from media or whatever it may be. And she was like clearly in the beginning of her rise.
Right.
But yeah, it was a push, but I never knew what the limits were. And so, yeah, I would always push. If it was bad one night, it would push it further another night. But the experience itself, yeah, I think it was obviously everything I learned about, cooking and working in restaurants was through that experience. But thinking back on it now, I think a lot about how yeah, it was like it was better that I didn't know what to expect or like have a grand plan of what this path would lead to. I just went along with what was right in front of me
in the process,
and was like really in the process and really just like, I talk about this a lot with my brother. It's just reps, like I'm just at the free throw line shooting free throws like all day long, and it's hours and hours. And you mentioned it briefly before, but I think I just lived 2 lives there. So I worked for her for 10 years, and I worked for that restaurant group and kind of grew throughout. But it wasn't a 40-hour job. I didn't have a life outside of that.
How many hours were you working? It was
like 70, 80 hours. And I was always there. And by the time I was like sous chef, it was more. By the time I was a chef at the Breslin, it was more than that. And so I think I just got a lot of reps in during that time, and just worked on technique and the craft of cooking. And then, was able to then that gets applied to.
It gets applied.
Yeah,
right.
it gets
but
applied to all the other stuff.
No, it's an interesting point you make. Like you have to be able to put yourself in there to practice, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But it's like you're in there. There's no bigger goal at this point in time. You don't need a bigger goal at this point in time. You're just trying to learn everything that you can.
Yeah.
Right. And it's exciting because you are learning every day, and you're spending those hours doing that. Tell me a little bit about more on the personal side, right? So you meet your wife's son, and son grew up in LA. Yeah. And she, I would imagine, has probably a very different Korean experience than you grew up having. How did that relationship expose you to a different side of Korean cuisine?
Well, okay, so New York was a huge eye-opening experience, seeing like the food there, but LA was even, because LA is such a bigger Korean community, there's restaurants that specialize in certain things. And so I think a lot of Korean restaurants outside of LA, it's like you have a giant menu, it's like this big and it's full of pictures and there's many, many pages, and everybody's trying to do everything. And then I went to LA and realized that there's like these little like, categories of certain types of noodles, and a place that just does Korean barbecue. There's a Korean barbecue place that just does offal, and there's like, so there's like a lot more specializing in LA that I like got to see and learn, and experience. So yeah, I mean, you know, she grew up with tons of Korean family members, but also just like a big Korean community and also access to a lot of this stuff. So yeah, I think that was like the next level of exposure to the Korean food. That was just, yeah, it was eye-opening. But you know, there's a lot of the Korean food and sort of, I think this goes back to like my childhood and growing up as an immigrant child and not being in a Korean community. You just kind of want to assimilate as quickly as you can, and you kind of want to like, you know, every immigrant child has that experience of like stinking of the food that your parents cook.
It's in your clothes.
Yeah,
when you're cooking at home, and then you show up.
So I rejected a lot of it. I pushed it away quite a bit when I was working at the Spotted Pig and beyond. I really just focused on doing anything outside of that. But yeah, I mean, just being exposed to it, just rediscovering it in this cool way and through her lens and her family and all that stuff was really, really a good reintroduction to it.
Yeah. It's like you're seeing it a completely different way, with new eyes.
But all familiar still.
But familiar, right? It wasn't, you know, you were just like, wow, like I kind of forgot about a lot of this. And so you would stay in New York, though, for about 13 years in total?
13 years total, yeah.
And then you would end up moving back to Oregon after your brother had moved back to Oregon around like 2014. Why move back to Oregon? New York was New York.
Yeah, well, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer.
Wow, okay.
That was towards the end of 13. And yeah, that was it, really. My brother had already moved back. I think he got a job. That was when he got a job at UP to be like something with the basketball team there. And, you know, 13 years in New York was a lot. The 10 years that I spent, like I said, probably felt like 20 years of working. I was pretty burnt out at that point. Also, having sort of worked my way out of a lot of my jobs working for the company, because, you know, I think what ended up happening was like, you just go for the next job and you keep going for the next job until you get to a point where there's no other job. It's like April's job, and she's got that job. I think her job is pretty secure. So yeah, it was towards the end of my time working for them, and then we got the news, and we just immediately bought a ticket to come back, and I just told her I need to take some time off, go take care of my mom. And so we did, and we moved we didn't move right away. We just went to go for that initial treatment, and there were some complications with the initial treatment, the oncology. The hospital that she went to for the first thing, there was lots of like insurance billing issues. They didn't have insurance at the time. They had a small business running a little dry cleaning shop. But yeah, it was a lot of just managing that. Also just being around for her first round of chemo. And then it was probably a couple months or a few weeks that we were there going through that. And then we kind of just made the decision. Son, unfortunately, had to sort of go along with it, which, she was super gracious to do. Because, for me, it was like 13 years in New York. I was kind of done. She had just been there for like 5-6 years, maybe.
Oh, wow.
And so there was a lot in her career as an artist was starting to grow, and she was getting a lot more work. And she was also, her family was there also, I think, at the time. Her brother had just moved there. And so there was a lot that she still wanted to experience with New York, but had to kind of pick up and move to Portland.
Come to Portland. And so y'all ended up coming to Portland, or you went to Springfield, or?
No, we came to Portland. My parents were, so after we had all left, we were, high school and college, my sister had gone up to college. They moved up to Portland.
Okay.
So they had this little dry cleaner shop in Multnomah Village for a few years. But yeah, they were in Beaverton, and they have a little house still. And yeah, we just moved in into their spare bedroom and
made it work.
Yeah, made it work. Went to treatment every few days with her every week, and then yeah, just really I took that year. I really did. I was so burnt out.
Yeah.
I just took that year not working.
You also
and
probably
really
realized that you were
family.
doing a lot, and
Yeah.
like that time was like, wow, I just really need to be here with my family.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, and Marshall was busy with a new job. He was traveling a lot with the basketball team and stuff, and so I would just I just lived at their house and just went to treatment with her and just stayed with her and hung out and just took a break.
Yeah.
Took a break from working.
We need breaks.
Yeah.
We need breaks.
Oh yeah.
So how long did your break last?
It was a full year at least.
Yeah.
It was a full year. During that time I was still like, trying to connect with chefs that I knew here that I had met in New York or in the times that I would travel here.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just connect and go like maybe spend a day in their kitchen or go do a stage somewhere. So I was still trying to kind of stay connected and meeting people. But actually what was really cool about that first year or two in Portland was that I connected with other chefs that had restaurants, but then I ended up connecting with a lot of other creatives. So it was through a friend of ours that has this bamboo like accessories company called Grovemade, Ken. I connected with him because we went to college together. He was up here doing his thing, had a small business. I just like love that idea of like DIY, do your own thing, little restaurant, little shop, little everything's like so much smaller in scale to New York.
Yeah.
That I was like, oh wow, like this is possible. Like in New York, the only reality is like you have to raise millions of dollars and spend tons of money, and then like liquor licenses are impossible, lease negotiations impossible, space impossible, everything's impossible. Well, I mean like New York, it's just everything's harder than it really needs to be. Yeah. And to come to Portland and feel like anything is possible was really amazing.
And so did you have on your mind restaurant?
I did only because I just know what I know, and I just I try and keep my sort of my view pretty close. It's really Sun's vision of like how Hanok ended up. But yeah, I don't, I think it served me well to not have this like broad vision of like it was very close. I didn't think too far ahead. I just wanted to do what was right in front of me. But yeah, so meeting a lot of creatives was awesome. It was awesome, like interior designers, architects, like our buddy, we talk about Josh, has a creative agency, and just like meeting people in worlds outside of the restaurants was really fun.
And you started from there ideating different things, right? You would come up with some different ventures. Maybe the two of you and Sam would come up with some different ideas. And at one point there was like a hot dog business.
Yeah, so a buddy of mine was between jobs, and we called it Stray Dogs. We like made our own sausages and like did a couple of fun sides and a bunch of ice cream, and we would do pop-ups. And this was like Portland is like the city of pop-ups.
Yes.
And there was a lot of people doing pop-ups around town, and there's a lot of restaurants that are closed on Sundays and Mondays. And so we would get to know people and do either collabos or we would do takeovers, and we would, it was a ragtag bunch. It was my sister had moved back by that time, and so she was like helping out, serving, and we have a family friend, Hannah, who would come, Patrick, just like this funny, ragtag bunch of like non-restaurant people. And we would pop up in these restaurants and like, do this like hot dog pop-up. It was fun.
It was fun.
Yeah, totally fun.
Probably fun coming out of like 10 years of very hardcore restaurant, career in New York. This felt like.
But we did it in a way that was like no pressure. And I think that was the biggest thing. Like it was such a pressure-filled experience working in New York. It was like, it was like working in a busy restaurant, and then it was like a restaurant opening, and then there was another opening later on. But it was like, then it's like, reviewers, New York Times, stars, and like, you know, like Michelin stars and all this stuff was like just so much pressure, right? But then to just be like, we're doing hot dogs. Just don't come at me. This is like not a big deal.
Yeah, these are hot dogs.
These are hot dogs. We're just having fun. Please don't review us. We don't need any star ratings. So yeah, that was the first sort of doing our first thing food-wise in Portland, and yeah, it was just fun. And it was
that was like the takeaway you felt like the thing that you learned out of that experience was like, oh yeah, I do enjoy doing this.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and I think the other thing too is my job was very narrow. It was like only about the food and making sure that the food is done. And there was like a whole nother side of the front of the house and how it's served and presented and hospitality given. So I was always sort of relegated to the kitchen and really only just focused on that. But to like have a hand in how it's presented, who you know, I think to see the other side of that was really great. And then the business side of it too, which was like, just how are we gonna make money off this thing? Like, how are we gonna? Because I'm not gonna do all this work and not make money.
Yeah, you gotta pay the bills.
Like, we had some bills to pay, and thankfully we had some friends who let us use their spaces for free, and there were some arrangements we made to have like a semi. I can't say permanent. It was like a temporary space, but we were in a space for a stretch, but yeah, that was like my first like doing everything. Yeah. And I just loved all of that.
Because it was a part that you now had exposure to that you didn't get access to so far in your career. But there was something interesting that was happening kind of while this is happening, right? Your son's born. Elliot's born.
Oh, right. I forgot about
that. Elliot's born, and your wife's son is like, yeah, this business stuff is great, but we need to figure out, you know, the money.
You can't be gone for 14 hours again. Like, she had already lived through that.
Yeah, so she was like, I don't know about this, Peter.
Yeah.
And she ends up like going look for a space or something like that, like through Craigslist.
Yeah.
So talk to me about this.
So yeah, Elliot was born January of 15. We were still kind of we had started the pop-up and we were starting to do it, and we had found a couple spaces to do it in a regular basis. We have the baby, and I had still had some pop-ups lined up, and so we were just doing them. And it wasn't even like the first month maybe, but I was gone for 12 hours, 12, 14 hours. Just
sheesh.
It was a couple of nights a week, so I wasn't doing it every day like I used to. But she was like, you can't be gone for 14 hours. She's like, no, I'm not going to do this again. Because we lived together in New York when I was opening the Breslin. So she got to see a lot of that. And that was, I would say that was the extreme of it.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I had a day off for, a year or something crazy. But at that time, we had this tiny little house off of Alberta. It was like an old rickety house, and it was like a cold, windy day, and like the shutters were like banging against the wall. And it was like midnight, maybe. I still hadn't come home from the pop-up that we were doing. And she was like, dude, I'm out of here. Like, I can't do this. She gets on Craigslist, finds this ad for what is, we have a snapshot of what that ad looked like, but it was just like these beautiful pictures of this private courtyard and then like this big open garage space. And I think immediately she saw it as like a creative space. I look at everything and I go, this can be a restaurant. Like I'm looking at the studio, I'm like, oh yeah, we could totally do a dinner here. But so she, made an arrangement to go see it. She like kind of didn't even tell me much about it. I don't think she even sent me the link, but she's like, hey, we're gonna go see this place. And
that's hilarious.
And we're like, I might end up at this parking lot, and like, I think it's back there. So we go back there, and you've experienced this. Most of the people that have come to Hanok have experienced this. But you're like, kind of like, is that right?
Yeah. Like, you're walking up, you're like, am I going to the right place?
And then you still like, you walk in and you still feel like you're in the wrong place. But it's this like beautiful like oasis.
Yeah.
And it opens up to this private courtyard, and it's super green. There's grass there. And you're like, why is there grass here? There's kids' toys all around. But we had that amazing like sense of discovery of the space, and like, you know, I was like, this is amazing. But like, how much is rent again? It's like $4,000.
$4,000.
Like, I don't think we can afford that. Like, how are we gonna do that?
Yeah.
She's like, I don't know either, but we're gonna do it anyways. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. And so
we did. We just
that's what you decided to like
and
start something there.
Yeah, and you know Kevin Kavanaugh. He's very much like he's a real estate developer, has a lot of like amazing, like unique sort of creative spaces, and he's very much a handshake guy. And you know, I looked up at him and I'm like, okay, cool, handshake. And he's like, that means we're doing it. I go, okay. Like, is there a lease coming? And he's like, we'll figure that out later.
Wait, what do you mean?
And so we did. That's like a classic Kevin thing. He's like, handshake.
Yeah.
Deal.
We'll figure it out later.
We'll figure it out later.
Huh.
And so we did. Yeah. I signed a lease, and then he helped us sort of figure out how to like do a sublease to the business. Kind of walked us through like what the steps to turning it into, because he went through a lot because it's a big commercial lot.
Right.
He went through a lot to turn that area into a residential space. Zoning
to get it
coding.
zoned
right. Code to follow code and to get it zoned right. And so what we were trying to do was turn it back, but leave some of it. And so there was like, it was complicated, and there's an architect that he works with, and he hooked us up and kind of helped really like, I wouldn't say held our hand through it, but he kind of like went like this. He like pushed us into it, you know?
Yeah.
He's like, I think you can do it. He's like, talk to Ben or Brett and they'll figure it out. Yeah, they'll figure it out. And I think that was another like of the first time that, you know, we just like jumped into something and didn't know anything about it.
And kind of figured it out from there.
Yeah.
So you move into this space.
Yeah.
And it's part residential, part commercial. And the idea is that y'all are gonna live there.
Yeah.
And you're going to do a pop-up, a rest. Like what are you gonna do with the rest of the space?
Well, I mean, naturally, because we were doing the pop-ups, naturally we would just kind of bring the pop-up into the space. But, you know, at the time it was like, you know, me and this other chef buddy of ours, then do we turn this into a business where it's a partnership? Does a partnership also, you know, somehow get involved with the space? Like the space was, you know, we wanted to have that space as like our home.
Yeah.
Having a home in the business together, like there's a lot of crossover. There was a bit of like some of that unpacking to do. And we did a run. We did like a month-long run of like, turned stray dogs into stray birds. It was like Korean fried chicken. And that's when I first started doing Korean fried chicken and some Korean flavors. Obviously, I was doing some Korean flavors with the hot dog pop-up. But yeah, we did a month-long run. I think it was like, you know, 2 nights a week or something. We did it in the space. And yeah, we like didn't have any money. Like putting everything on credit cards. We had no money to do a build out. Her son's mom thankfully helped us with some money, and her dad helped us with some money. I had some, but not a lot. My mom helped a little bit. And then I just like maxed out like 4 credit cards. But yeah, we just like, I mean, on a shoestring budget. We like got the plans through and approved. And then that's when it was like, oh shoot, yeah, we gotta do this. Because before then it was, you know, when like Kevin kind of pushed us through, we didn't know that we can separate the space. And so when we rented it, it was an all residential space. It was like it was all kind of connected, and we had to put a wall there to separate the living side from the rest of it. And so we worked out some plans and got it submitted. And like the architect who did it has a funny story. He was like taking these plans around all the city planning. And if you know about city planning, they're generally trying to tell you no.
They're like, we're not doing that.
But they saw it, and I think he has a nice, like he's a baby face and seems believable. But he was like, so here's our plan. And they were like, well, I haven't seen this before, but there's nothing in the code that says you can't. I guess you can. Clunk. Like,
Wow.
And he just was like, everywhere he went was surprised that they all said yes. And he came back, he's like, I don't know, I guess you can do it. Here you go. Here's the approved plans.
Were you like, hell yes? Or you were like, oh my goodness, now we really got to do it?
That's how I felt. Son was probably more excited, but I was like, oh, now what do we do? I don't have any money. Like, you don't have, like, how are you going to do the build out?
Yeah.
And that was another, like, one of those things where we just like figured it out. We like kind of GC'd the project. We had a general contractor who helped us through that initial, like, getting the plans bidded out by people. And then we just like, hey, do you know a plumber? And they would like connect us, and then he would show up, and then we'd be like, no. And then, you know, it just
starts to come together.
It just starts to come together. And then, like,
right.
And then we ended up having like lots of people who were like, wow, this is really cool. Like, I want to do this. And a lot of people helped.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who, just kind of helped along the way.
It's one of those projects that you want to be a part of, right? It means so much more than another thing.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's been my experience when I've been able to come to the restaurant. It's like, there's nothing like this. Never been anything like this. How did you decide what the cuisine you wanted to focus on, right? Because you were like, you know, you talked a little bit about like trying Korean flavors on this and that.
Yeah.
But the experience at Han Oak is much more Korean. How did you make that decision?
So I actually had a really cool trip. Naomi Pomeroy of Beast had an opportunity to go cook for some event in Japan.
Okay.
And she took 2 of her staff, but couldn't take any. Well, she had another spot to fill, but couldn't take any more from her staff because then they wouldn't be able to operate the restaurant. And she was like, "Do you want to go?" And I was like, "Yeah." No. This was still like, I think it was still right after Elliot was born. Anyways, I had an opportunity to go to Japan, and then thankfully they were able to sort of change their tickets around for a 2-week stay in Korea on the way back. And so I went to do the trip to Japan, which is like mind-blowing. I mean, that's another whole mind-blowing food experience. Because like to go to restaurants like back to back to back, where it was like, oh my God, that was the best place I've been to ever. And then like the next day was better than that.
Better than that.
Better than that. And then we went to like this tempura shop where like the 90-year-old like grandpa is like frying tempura where his neck, because this is his stance, like frying tempura out of this copper pot, his neck is permanently like this.
Oh my goodness.
Wild. You're
Wow.
like, this is a level of commitment to one thing that you'll just never see.
You can't get that anywhere else.
And I saw all that, experienced all that, and I felt like, what am I doing? Like, I call myself a chef. Like, no, I'm a fraud. Like, I'm nowhere near being like these people. And then I went to Korea. And I was like, oh, this stuff is like doable. Like, I'm not trying to like bash Korea against the cuisine of Japan. It was different. It was like, again, familiar yet new, but like doable. And I was like, all this stuff is like, it speaks to me. I feel like I can interpret it in ways that's interesting for myself mainly, but for people who come to dine with us. And so like that was the trip where I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna cook Korean food.
Wow.
And came back. You know, my mom has always been sort of one end of the barometer, son being the other. And so there was always like, she knows more sort of the modern Korean American like palate. My mom's more traditional. And then I just had to figure out what I liked in between that to make sure that everybody was happy. And and for me, as long as everybody was happy with what I was making, I'm happy.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And, you know, that's when I felt confident. That's when I felt like, you're either going to like this or you don't.
Yeah,
but like,
you're not trying to please.
I'm not trying to please anybody. I'm not trying to go get awards because there's none to get. I'm not trying to get starred ratings, you know? And so, yeah, it was like, it was great.
It was great.
It was freeing. It was like very like, yeah, I can do this.
Where'd the name come from?
So hanok is in reference to like old traditional Korean homes or architecture even. And a lot of it has to do with like the shape of the building and all that, but like where it sits in relation to the, you know, there's like mountains in the back and there's like water in the front. There's usually a big courtyard. And my mom, we just like went through a hanok village in Korea.
Wow.
And I'd known the word and the term, but you know, Korean words also are phonetically really difficult to pronounce. And it just felt right, and we were living there, and it seemed pretty natural.
Seemed appropriate.
Yeah.
How did y'all come to manage living and working in the same structure? Especially as I imagine opening a restaurant, it's it's a lot of hours.
Yeah.
How did y'all manage that?
I feel like everybody's sort of going through it in the past couple of years. So we were a couple of years ahead of that. It was just survival mode.
Yeah.
You know, it was just survival mode. And we had, I think just the reality is there was a lot of issues and, son just being a new mom and not having a lot of support, and her family's not here. Although our family is here, we didn't want to lean on them. My mom's going through chemo. We just kind of maybe this is another experience that I just kind of try to forget because it was really
so
difficult. But yeah, we were just in survival mode. Yep. And at that time with the business too, I was like, we had no idea how we were gonna do it. The construction was taking a lot longer than it needed to because we just were piecemealing it together. But yeah, survival mode, man. I feel like I'm still. I feel like I'm
still in it, right?
Yeah, still in.
I think what's interesting about Hanok though is one thing you mentioned was that you weren't trying to win any awards. You weren't trying to be validated by these outside validators, and that's back what ended up happening, right? Like, folks started to come. Folks started to write about it. You had Kanye West there for dinners. You've had a lot of people there for dinners that wasn't your intention. How do you feel about that?
It's exciting. It's exciting for us and, for the staff too. But I struggled a lot with a lot of stuff. Identity and like, how I'm presenting this cuisine that I was also rediscovering myself. And, I think it's nice for me to just be able to know that like a lot of that came not just from the food itself. Because, like I had imposter syndrome like, anybody might. But I recognize that it's the space that's so unique and it's the experience that's so unique. And the food, if it's good, will take it over the edge. But like it is that the idea that people are walking off the street kind of having a hard time finding it and then like experiencing this like sense of discovery of like, some secret hideout.
Yeah.
But I was also running away from a lot of the identity stuff and also kind of naturally felt like I was hiding. It was a hideout because it was a safe space for me. Like I wanted to do things that like made me happy and made, brought balance to my life. And like, I kind of shut a lot of people and things out and the space allowed me to do that. And I'm a private person, and so like letting people in to my space, especially a space that we lived in, was really hard. But yeah, once we started like making lists and like critics would come and then they would want to talk to us about the story, and I just kept pushing like the story of the experience more than the food. I just still kept trying to tamper the pressure and the expectations a lot. I still think I do that, You
have to do what's best for protecting your energy, right? Like you still want to be able to show up and not feel like you can't show up.
Yeah.
Right.
But there would be like really silly dishes that I would just have fun doing. Like we do a pudechige where I cut the little hot dogs into like a little octopus, and so when you like put it in hot water, all the it comes out as a tentacle. And then like a 3 Michelin star chef comes into town because his family's here, and he's like sitting there, and I'm like, is this guy gonna order the pudechige with the octo dog? Like, what the hell? Please don't. And then he like orders it, and I'm like, oh God, no. I have the nightmare of like, chefs of that caliber coming in and going, who is this numbnuts doing this thing? And I mean,
but
I had to, there's a lot I have to do. There's a lot I have to
just. What you decided to do, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So Hanok's been running for years now, and then pandemic hits, and you decide that y'all are going to open another restaurant.
Yeah.
Toki.
Well, so March comes along and it's very real. But thankfully we were able to do well enough that we saved some money to put a down payment on a house, which was a huge step. But it was a week before that state mandated shutdown that Son and I went to the office to sign our papers to get the house.
Yeah.
And on the way, we were like, I said to her, I was like, hey, what if this like COVID thing is real? And she had been keeping track of it for months, or for weeks at least. We have a good friend of ours, Gary. He's like this world traveler foodie. And
Gary the foodie.
Gary the foodie was like, we keep joking with him that he's like patient zero, because everywhere he went and would leave, there would be an outbreak.
Oh my God.
He was like in Shanghai. He was like traveling in China, then went to like Italy right before their big outbreak. But but anyways, so she had been kind of keeping an eye on it and was like, this thing is happening. And then like a week before, we're like going to sign the papers. I'm like, okay, this thing is happening. Like, do we go buy a house right now? Like, what if we have to close a restaurant? She's like, we're like, nah, let's do it. And we like high-fived and like went in and took selfies. But yeah, we moved into this house right at the time. And so yeah, it was scary.
Yeah.
We closed. We were fortunate to be able to have some money in the bank to like pay a few weeks wages out, paid a bunch of sick pay out, just like put a bunch of money in our staff's pockets, thinking it would only be a couple weeks.
Thinking it'd be a little bit.
Yeah, and then like, we were like, okay, we're dedicating to paying for health insurance for those who have it, so like we can do that. Then we were like getting everybody on unemployment, trying to help guide them through that. And then, and then it was survival mode until like, through all of that, the first 6-9 months anyways, everybody was plenty happy not working and getting unemployment. And so like, and I didn't feel comfortable asking anybody to come back. If they deny the job, do they get kicked off of unemployment? Then there was like all these like PPP loans coming out. So it was a lot of like managing a lot of that. But again, going back into survival mode, I felt pretty like, although it was different, I felt pretty kind of comfortable going, okay, well, we got to just keep trucking on every day. We got to like figure out what to do and, figure it out. But yeah, we did that through the first 6-9 months. Then unemployment was starting to run out for people, and I was like, okay, what should we do for those who want to come back? Like, here's some options. Like, let's not do dine-in, let's do takeaway. And so like we started off with a takeaway menu, and then our landlord at Toki, the downtown spot, reached out and was like, hey, this is coming available. I can give you a deal to get you on your feet.
And there's a kitchen and everything already in there.
Everything's in there. Like, you don't have to pay any key money or anything. Just an opportunity.
Yeah.
And so, we kind of, I wanted to do it. We had sort of developed this takeaway menu that the idea for me was that Hanok was on a trajectory to being just a full service restaurant.
Yeah.
And Son anyways has always sort of fought that and really loved it being a creative space. And of course I fight for it being a restaurant, because I only see what's like right in front of me. And so there was a lot of fighting over that.
Yeah.
a lot of fighting over that. But ultimately, she's right, right? Because it's an amazing creative space.
Yeah.
And if we can look at it now, so now how I look at it is if it can be like a restaurant incubator in some way, where we can like help somebody who may be in a similar situation, let's say a chef and their wife and a tiny baby.
Yeah.
Like, could they potentially like do a residency for 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is?
That's really
Can
cool.
we not help get them over that first hurdle, which is like just the startup costs of a restaurant? Could it be a space that just a gathering space for other kinds of events? So, that's where we're at now. I feel like, if that was a test subject, right, that like we do this takeaway menu, pick it up and then like drop it at a new location and then like get that team working and developing and give them opportunity as well. Like I'm still trying to figure out how to like bring our longtime GM Austin and our chef Scotty to like be a partner in it in ways that like will benefit all the hard work they put into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah.
It was it seemed like a thing. It seemed like an unnatural thing to do in that time to like do a new space, but we were given an opportunity that was a lot less risky.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes that's how it happens, right? You kind of respond to what's in front of what's in the moment. It's very much to how you operate. And so like when you think about it in totality, it's like that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Reflecting on your journey and how things have been going and how you spoke a little bit about, you were going into a little bit about how this vision for helping other, startup chefs, entrepreneurs, given the landscape of this, today, what advice would you have for folks that are like, I think I want to be a chef. I think I want to start a restaurant. What advice would you have reflecting on your journey?
I feel like I give conflicting advice. Well, I'm sure I give conflicting ideas and advice all the time. There's some people I definitely push. And I go, you're ready. You don't think you're ready. You're ready. We had two people that have worked for me for a long time, and they just always sort of have been, around. But I'm like, you're ready. Go do it. Go push. And then there's people that just shouldn't. They're just not. There are people that aren't built for it.
Yeah, it takes a certain type of person.
Because it's got to be, like for me, I think there's been like ups and downs in how much we do and how little we do, but like failure is never an option, and you have to have that mentality. Otherwise, you're just not going to survive.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go for it, give everything you got, and failure is not an option in your mind, then yeah, I encourage everyone to do their own thing. I feel like we've had that talk.
Yeah, we have had that talk
early on.
Yeah, we talked a lot about like not sitting there, spending your whole life doing something that you're miserable doing.
Yeah.
Right, just because it's the thing that you've been doing. But
because it's gonna be miserable when it's your thing too.
Yeah.
But at least it's your thing.
At least it's your thing, right? It's yours to. It's your terms, and I think there's a lot of difference between doing something on your terms and being maybe not happy with it versus doing something on someone else's terms, and they are definitely dictating your every move, right?
And I'm a control freak in that way. I think I do want it to be done my way. I tell my staff all the time, I'm like, okay, whether it's the wrong answer or the right answer, there's always a right answer, which is my answer. Like I'll give you we'll go one way and it'll be the worst decision of our whatever.
Yeah.
But you're not wrong because it was my call.
It's my call.
And I'd rather it be my call than somebody else's call. So me doing something somebody just telling me
you to do.
And I mean that's pretty terrible for the people that work for me, but like because they're just doing what I tell them to do. Unfortunately.
Well, at least they know who to point fingers at.
But we're in it together, as worse as it can be, and this goes back to the great fortune of being in a restaurant, is there's another service tomorrow. It's like a new, there's another game. You know, right now we're just doing the best we can for what, you know, for today. Just win the day, you know. There's
Win the
always
day.
another game.